Hello, everybody, and welcome to the September 13th meeting of the Westford Budget Task Force. Let me just check and see if we have a quorum. We do. Okay, good. So we can get started. There'll be a few people to join us here in progress. We can start off with the minutes. So somewhere in your inbox was the August 16th and 23rd minutes. I don't know if anyone had any comments on the minutes. If not, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? We can do a hand raise. Okay, thank you. So we want to start off by spending a little bit of time just reflecting on what happened in the retreat, what individual comments people got, where we were communicating effectively, where you got a bunch of questions that suggest we should maybe fill out our communication, fill out our information a little bit. So yeah, no particular order. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay, Christina.
My two tables were pretty receptive, no major, disagreements or anything like that, but there were some questions and some comments. So on school spending, they were asking where the out of district tuitions show up, if they even show up in those function codes. I didn't know the answer to that. They were also asking for SPED, like where SPED in general shows up, and I believe it's just within all of those lines. I don't think it's separated out, but we may want to just make a statement or something, because again, I didn't attempt to answer. They also wanted to know how we compared with other towns in our SPED and OOD numbers and spending. Were we higher, lower, that kind of thing. Why was professional development so low? I did explain that it was Valerie had said something about it could be in-house, could be, that may not be bad, but again, I think we probably want to explain that. As far as news outlets, like where they get their communication from, a couple people told me that it was Valerie's social media posts and the WPS bulletin. They thought maybe hard copy mailers might be a good way to reach people, social media, and they also made the point of saying we need to hit all forms of communication because different people get things in different ways. I had some questions on our health insurance and why the town isn't on the GIC plan. Two teachers, one an active teacher from Lowell and one a retired from Lexington, raved about the GIC plan, how the prices were low and their healthcare was great, and a couple of other residents also asked if we were overspending in any category or if there were cuts to be considered. Then they wanted to see the trade-offs because they wanted to sort of make sure that whatever savings we might be getting, they thought was worth giving up the service. Lots of comments on trash and recycling changes, especially the recycling limit. There were several people that were really concerned about that, saying that they would never be able to fit in the 96 gallons every other week. They were also amazed at the amount of trash that Westford puts out at the curb. Our data point of 18% above, or 17 point, whatever it was. And then the last one was that people were worried if the taxes increase, that many people will be priced out of Westford.
Yeah, that's a bunch of great observations. I had some of the same comments, and well, let me hold off a little bit. Other folks, Amy.
I had two separate groups. One was more of a town employee table. The other was more of a parent and people involved, maybe in business. And everybody was sort of glazed over at the very fine details that we provided. The big picture was like, they kind of were like, so what? So it'll just be an override. And some of the conversations I've been having, everybody in my passing, that's sort of just been, we'll just pay more. We're not willing, right? And I know that that's not an accurate representation of our town by any means, but a couple of interesting things that I thought came up was some focuses on pedestrian safety, and a conversation about whether or not there was better access pedestrian walkways to schools if more people would walk and less people would utilize a bus system that lived closer. The other comment somebody made was the amount of outside consultants that are used whenever they go to do something. There's always a study, like an environmental impact. I have to imagine, I don't know the details of that, but they always seem to use a similar consultant, and that's outside. I don't know where in the budget that lies, but this person thought it might be some amount of money that might be costing quite a bit of money, I guess. The other suggestion somebody said was that Groton has its own municipal electric company, and rates there are really more reasonable. I don't know if that is any possibility. And then a yard waste transfer station. How much yard waste is turning up into our regular trash? Some people say they pay landscape companies to come pick it up, but there's really nowhere for people to put these things. No opportunities. And then of course, Valerie Young came up quite a bit and her ability to educate us all. But it just sounded like the people that I spoke with were not willing to let go of any of the services that they currently experience. That the schools were top priority in some of these people's opinion. If the schools begin to fall, our property rates will as well. Again, just an opinion there.
Thanks, Amy. Other reflections or feedback?
I can speak something about the tables I was sitting at. So I was sitting at a table with two teachers from the school districts. So they were trying to understand how does their town's budget work. And also, because we are facing the deficit for fiscal year 25, 26, and 27. So they were trying to understand how does the numbers on those bubble and putting together, and how does that impact the total deficit? They are trying to understand. So how does our budget task force work towards to cover those deficits, and also so they can kind of figure out what's the impact for our next step is override. So for the override, so they are trying to estimate what's going to be the outcome for our residents. Even they are trying, if even they will be willing to pay higher taxes, but they are not sure what's the outcome going to be for the override. And also we talk about the pupil service, because the school just have one line. Those are above the median. So they want to understand what kind of expenditure costs that 20% above the median cost. So we just explain the reason about the food service and transportation. So that's pretty much I got from the two tables.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So few things I've already heard that happened in my tables. One was just being able to explain the bridge between the percent of the percent of available town funds that go to schools, which is higher than the benchmark in that first group that we're looking at, and then the per pupil expenditures, which are generally pretty low, and in many cases, in many categories, much further below. So I had to explain, well, you have to look at the total levy as one factor. You have to look at how many students there are as a percentage of population, because if you have two towns that are the same in terms of levy, if one has more students than the per pupil, et cetera, et cetera. So we may just in the document want to make special care that people can sort of walk that logic. I also had the tax relief question come up. So I think we'll have to communicate, not the budget task force, but it's some recommendation we would make to the various boards, is to make sure they're ready to talk about the different programs we have in town to provide tax relief. So that's part of the picture too. I I also had a couple, like a sort of a statistical set of questions at one of my tables, which was in a category where we're above the median, there wasn't a lot of context about basically standard deviation. I don't know if we wanted to get that far into statistics, but in most cases, the numbers that we have there are very, very close to the median, but you can't get that context without seeing the spread. And so I think that'll probably be in the report, because we'll probably be showing sort of full benchmark tables instead of just difference to median. But I had a couple people pick up on that. I had a couple people that had never been to a town event before, who sort of came at the whole idea of, why do our taxes go up every year, and why can't we manage within our means? And I think that there'll be a group of people who will have that reaction. And again, that's not a budget task force thing. That's really for the boards to pick up as they explore whatever the next steps here are. But just a lot of people who come to that event, are pretty plugged into the town. But there will be a bunch of folks that, will have no experience with this, and we'll just have to have a way to bring them in too. All really good pieces of feedback, and all things that I think will end up influencing our report. Any other reflections on the event?
I have a couple notes. I had the same sort of questions about out of district and special education, and just for those of us here, I just ran out of time for those, because they don't fall under as easy as a comparison for the per pupil spending. The state doesn't really encourage you to split out of district spending over your students who are out of district, because that data set includes high cost special education and low cost charter school or school choice. So you can't just take that number and split it over those pupils. So I actually brought a lot of that analysis to the school committee this week to try and start thinking about what makes sense for that type of analysis to show, because people are asking that, right? Like, how do we compare for those types of categories to other districts? I had the tax relief question, and sort of related to that was like the increased ambulance revenue. What would that impact be? Would there be an impact on that to taxpayers, or is that like on the insurance end of things? How I had a lot of questions about town employee benefits and how they compare to the private industry. So I don't know if that's something that, not just particularly about what Christina said about like the state GIC, but just what percentage of premiums are covered by the town. Does the town eat the annual premium increase, or is that shared with employees? And what type of health benefits are offered? Like what vendors, high deductible, hospital choice, some other terms I'm not super familiar with. For the trash, someone asked if that included businesses, and if we could, and then a related thought there was, if we had a policy decision to impact restaurant takeout containers that residents bring home, would that impact household trash amounts? A question about if DPW is under median because of our asphalt mitigation agreement. So I don't know the answer to that. I thought that was a good observation. And then a lot of comments about like creating videos on WestfordCAT and sharing them from their YouTube page, having flyers and maybe visiting churches or other places where people congregate, like having maybe a talking thing at Cameron Senior Center, how to leverage high school students to broaden the communication. And I think that's kind of it. Oh, a question about student enrollment. So I hadn't thought to include that. But we just had a study done last year. So I'll make a note that should fold into the final report somewhere.
Good, thanks, Valerie. Vibhu?
Yeah, so a few questions which I received. One was on that our student population is around 20%. It is much higher than rest of the towns, and still our expenditure is close to other towns. So that was a good observation that if we have higher number of percentage of students, what we are doing. The second one was, I will say this is a perception that some people mentioned that there is lot many employees, especially in police, safety, fire, etc. So they wanted to understand how the FTs look like in those areas in comparison to other towns. The third one was when we are talking about salaries, etc. So there was one employee from town, and she mentioned that when we do those kind of things for school, we need to look into school and town together, because there is a feeling that there is much better compensation for school versus town employees. So these are the three key observations, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Vivi. I think there was a lot of, I don't know if there's a lot, but there continues to be questions that the town side has about schools and school side has about towns, and hopefully this effort will help bring everyone closer to the same sheet of music. Christina.
Just one other, I don't know if this is for us or more for the boards, but I've had like 3 or 4 different conversations. I've also seen comments on Facebook. People still don't understand how the tax levy and how the 2.5% works. They think that if we reevaluate homes, the town is somehow getting more money. If we have a split tax rate, they think the town's going to be getting more money because businesses are paying more. They don't understand that it's just a shift. I actually went back and forth with somebody a couple times because I made that statement and they just flat out didn't believe me. So I think we may want to do something. I've seen a few things online that kind of explain it well, but nothing that I really love. So I think just a simple, this is how it works. The town's not getting more money because your home value goes up. Like, I think we all understand that, but I think we need to explain that a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the draft document does refer to kind of a Prop 2.5 explainer, and we should make sure that that's there with helpful links so people understand it. So really good point. Any other reflections before we change gears? So I think the way that things roll forward from here is we sort of work to complete the document and edit it into a cohesive whole. We'd like to get that to the various boards, say a week or so before we have what's going to be a joint tri-board meeting in early October that'll be focused just on this. We'll just spend a whole meeting sort of presenting findings and explaining and answering questions. I don't think we've scheduled that meeting yet, Kristen. No,
it was the sentiment of the select board. They wanted a full separate meeting, so we'll need to shop dates around with FinCom, school committee, and select board.
Okay, so I think if we let's say that meeting happens around the 10th, then sometime in the first couple of days of October, we'd like to have the report in some form, which gives us about 3 weeks. The other thing that I know is ongoing work is continuing to explore the efficiencies. And I think we've decided in past meetings that we're not going to be ready to present any kind of final case on those. We'll have to present those as sort of a work in process. We may have some indications on some and some open, or maybe that they're all open and still being explored. So I think what we'll want to do today is have a couple people, maybe just 2, who are kind of the editors of the document, who would take responsibility for editing, policing up missing content. Not the intention wouldn't be that these 2 people would fill in all the missing content. The content would come from all of us, but these couple people would kind of shepherd that document to completion. And then I think there's a continued working team on the efficiencies that will keep on working there. And I do want to mention that last night the select board did vote to take the first sort of concrete revenue enhancement improvement action.
Christina.
Thanks to Shanna's work. Yeah.
Christina found it first. She gets the initial credit for it.
So we did move our ambulance fees to market. And for anyone watching, most of the ambulance fees, not most, but a lot of the ambulance fees are negotiated in contracts. So like with Blue Cross, for example, the town negotiates an amount. So the amount that we're billing people that we have negotiated contracts like that for won't change. Medicare is the same. But there's a group of folks that will respond to a different billing rate, like Harvard Pilgrim. And in general, your copay, the amount a resident would pay if they end up paying a copay, is set in your insurance policy. If the insurance company is billed more, that doesn't change your copay rate. So in all the cases I can think of, this doesn't actually immediately affect what the residents would pay. Over some period of time, insurance rates change based on their costs. So I guess it could have some impact over a longer period of time. But in any case, good opportunity. I don't know if you remember the forecasted savings, Shanna, but it was Kim last night and I forgot. I want to say it's
Lower than I thought it would be, but I think Dan, 50 to 70,000 is the approximation.
So we came up with that was a range. So the chief and deputy chief came out with 60. I came out with 65. So we're thinking somewhere in that range.
I was hoping it
That's
was gonna
great.
be a little bit over the 6-figure mark, but we'll take everything we can get, chipping
No,
away
that's-
slowly.
That's precious dollars. So anyway, first win on the board there. Maybe let's see, in the agenda, I think we cover the efficiencies first. So if KDL, I guess that's you, Kristen. Do you want to talk a little bit about efficiencies?
Yes, I will share my screen. Just bear with me because I am using an iPad and my desktop to share that. So I just want to caveat this, as Tom stated before, we're looking at efficiencies in a very rough format right now. And this is no means to be saying that we're going to be going forward with all of these efficiencies. I'm sure there's people, departments and employees with the town and the school side that may see some of these things and think that we're automatically making a change, which is not the case. So just want to make sure that we have that caveat. We learned a lot about these efficiencies through our conversations with both department heads and other municipalities that we benchmark ourselves from, as well as some of you on the committee who are learning other things. So I've bucketed this to talk about shared services first on the municipal side, what other communities are doing. So veterans are sharing services. For veterans districts, that's a state requirement to have a veteran service officer, but not every community needs one based upon the veteran population. There is possibilities related to regional health districts and health associations. Westford actually already services for 3 other communities with some of the health services through our grant that we received from the state. There's been a lot of talk about regional dispatch. What we learned from Franklin, they are successful in it, but it is not a quick process. It's many years. And there are communities who say that they'll opt into regional dispatch and then they don't. So that is a wild card there. There's municipalities who share an assessor. The town of Reading that we talked to does share an assessor. We can talk about that, but from my understanding is I think we have enough work for one assessor in Westford. And then kind of new type of positions, sustainability coordinator, right? Sustainability is a huge, broad term. Many people take it many different ways, but we started off with a regional sustainability coordinator with Carlisle and Westford. We've taken that totally in-house 100%. Do we look at those other options and opportunities? The next for municipal, that's not a shared service, is kind of miscellaneous and more of consolidation, and maybe so staff are focused on certain things and not others. Right now, all of our insurance claims for town and school are very decentralized. Each department takes on their own insurance claim and is tracking it and is chasing that. There's other methods and opportunities to centralize that and perhaps streamline it and take less time because only 1 or 2 people would be dealing with that at a certain point in time. We talked about hours of operation of town buildings. This could be for more energy efficiency, staff attraction, more evening hours to the public who work during the day. Of all of our surrounding communities, we're the only town that works a full day Friday. I'm not saying that that needs to be either way. It's just, and sometimes you might not get efficiencies from that. If you're open later at night, perhaps you're not seeing that electrical efficiency or the efficiency from your staff. Reviewing all fees and permits, including ambulance and recreation annually. I think we've been talking to departments about that a lot. A lot of the fees and permits have not been reviewed in quite some time. So making up ground there and maybe having a standard practice on an every 2 to 5 year basis, reviewing our fees and permits unless there's some catastrophic change. And we see a lot of overlap in our community outreach positions. We have a community wellness coordinator under the town manager's office. There's a regional community wellness coordinator under the Board of Health. And then we also have our outreach positions at the Council on Aging. All which serve great populations, do wonderful things, but is there some efficiencies we can reach by creating that all under one roof? And then we learned from Acton that they receive many, many grants for what services they could not provide. I know Westford goes after a lot of grants as well. It's also a little bit decentralized and perhaps not as planned out. So if we move forward with a strategic plan that we want to target certain grants for certain initiatives and be a little bit more strategic in that process, that might help us. Trash and recycling, obviously the topic of the year, and perhaps longer than that. Investigating pay-as-you-throw models or other models to reduce our waste. Eliminating curbside recycling and trash collection altogether, which I'm sure is not going to be a good option for our residents as they are used to this from many, many years ago. And then perhaps negotiating some group pricing for compost pickup services or other alternative methods for people to get rid of their waste. Ambulance. So investigating the benefits of the in-house ambulance service versus a private contract. We are hearing from a lot of our neighboring municipalities with private contractors that they can't even staff the community that they're supposed to be in, and Westford is actually covering those. So from the outset, it doesn't seem like privatization would be a great idea, but certainly something to investigate. Ambulance revenue increasing. Again, shout out to Christina and Shana for your efforts and the fire department's efforts. We are on our way to doing that and just making sure that we're on top of the billing to make sure we're collecting every last cent we possibly can. Ambulance certified public expenditure program, which we do have, and we do get some revenue from that. I need to look into that a little bit further. We talked about dispatch, so I'm not going to go through all of these notes, but I'll share this with everyone. For our cemeteries, obviously we have 5, which is a little bit unique, and we do use those sale and fees for offsetting operating costs. Could we do something a little bit different for that service that we provide? And then in terms of recreation, kind of some policy discussions about using the general fund to support recreation versus it being fully supported by fees, and a financial analysis that we're recovering all of our costs. Westford's in a unique position that we do have recreation. We do cover after-school childcare. We're the only community that we talk to that do that. The school departments cover it in the other communities. And we also know that there's some communities we talk to that actually don't even have a recreation department. So that is a unique finding that we saw. Some unique efficiencies that we could look at related to town and school. It's certainly been brought into motion. Public facilities with town and school, and could that be a combined function that is just led by one department, several unions, and they service both town and school? One thing that really stuck in my head from the town of Franklin is we need to let the school educate our students and help lead the teachers and the administrators. And the town is really best in performing duties such as the public facilities maintenance, plowing, DPW type of work. And they even mentioned HR in Franklin, that, the schools do not need to be the the experts in HR let the town side take that on. So certainly something that we could investigate. And then just general overall procurement. There is a separation right now in town and school procurement. Could that be combined in any way under a procurement division or department or a lead person? And then just energy projects related to our public buildings. We should probably have a more unified approach to that. And we are working through that with the Amoresco contract and some other items that we're working through. For financial for both town and school, an opportunity to streamline or provide efficiencies. Weekly payroll is now paid to town employees. I think school's a little different because of your cycle, but moving to maybe a bi-weekly payroll setting, some efficiencies for employees there that are doing their timesheets every week. The payroll office is running payroll every week, week after week, and really can't do anything else related to that. We've had a lot of conversations about the health insurance option, and obviously Westford is unique with our a self-insured health insurance trust, and high deductible may or may not be a good option based upon what we need to pay into that trust to keep it viable for our employees. I've talked to the treasurer collector's office about this, is encouraging residents to receive bills from the town electronically rather than paper. It's a small thing, but could we cut down on postage and paper mailings and go to a more electronic version if people opt into doing that? And then I think this group has talked into it, but Westford fuels their fleet in a very unique way. Some of the vehicles are fueled up at the DPW garage on North Street, and then others have a card that's called a WEX card that they could actually just go to any gas station and they get a slight savings. But I do feel like we are losing out on the efficiency of purchasing fuel in bulk. And Westford fuel actually is really expensive if you go to one of the private gas stations in town. So that could be a possibility. Obviously, we'd have to look at our tank capacity, any permitting that would need to be done. But that could certainly be an efficiency that we see for both town and school. Technology, we do have a combined director of town and school, but perhaps we could be a little bit more combined and efficient related to the inventory of our systems and software, noting what software packages we pay for, we don't use, or what packages we pay for and we don't use to the highest extent practicable. Moving away from Microsoft Office to another platform, Google Suite, something else. I don't know if that's most efficient, but certainly looking into that. Moving into a more paperless environment. I know that we're all, used to paper in some sort. A lot of people transition over to paperless. Some people have a little bit more of resistance to that. Again, short dollars, but the price of paper and toner are quite expensive. Looking at some sort of vehicle sharing software system related to who's using what vehicle at what point in time, so we don't have a vehicle sitting for a period of time not into use. And then investigating telephone lines that we're paying for that we don't use, such as landlines or cellular. Again, on a vehicle component, right now, some vehicles are maintained up at DPW. Others are going out for private service. Some of our employees are being asked to, understand when a certain vehicle requires an oil change or other maintenance, when perhaps that isn't their household duty at home and they really don't know how to do that. So can we be more efficient in that realm? And then I think these next two school items, and Jenny, if I do not explain them correctly, please jump in. I think you provided me with these potential efficiencies, creating an Amazon direct link to Munis integration, and then in studying our food service, full accounting of indirect charges, and defining what food service is fiscally responsible for the town and school side to take on. So this is a brain dump bucket list. Happy to talk about any others that you might have to add to this. Say, this is definitely never going to happen in Westford. Kristen, you're crazy for thinking about this. And then talking about how we might integrate this conversation into our report. So I will stop sharing so we can all see each other.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. So that's a lot. Any reactions? looks like there's a lot left to do. I guess what would be interesting is, I guess one question for the group is, at what point do we decide that our role in pursuing efficiencies is sort of exhausted, and further exploration of these things would go to the relevant boards as action items? It seems like the kind of thing that might go on an awfully long time, and at some point a handover might be good. Amy?
Yeah, I guess, speaking perhaps to some of these departments, when we spoke with the fire department about the ambulance, we learned that outsourcing that really quickly was probably not a great idea. So before going into detail about any of these things, perhaps maybe asking somebody, what of these items seem most reasonable, that we can then dive back into? Maybe those departments specifically, or
Christina?
Yeah, so I would agree with Amy on getting maybe our town department heads or whatever town staff is most, is sort of the expert in whatever those areas are, to get their take on it. Some of them actually did come straight out of my department head interviews. And I can certainly, highlight those or whatever. Like that whole pretty much the whole technology section was cut and pasted from Mike Wells's email, I believe. But there are other things that we found from other towns that, may or may not even save us anything. And at this point, I certainly can't go and evaluate those. I just have no basis. I have no expertise to be able to do that. So I think I've said this before. I'm kind of at a standstill with some of the efficiencies. And I think we do need our town staff, I would assume, their input.
Valerie?
I think it's an interesting balance because I'm remembering back in May or something when we sort of first started to talk about this, and I remember that sort of this consensus that the Hingham report never felt like it went far enough. Like we wanted to go further than the Hingham report, right? And be more specific and not just have these general things that really, like, if you had brainstormed maybe with a group of people in last winter, you could have come up with some of them, right? So I felt like the intent was to go a little bit further or a little bit more, to push a little bit harder. And so, but obviously, like saying that from May when we were maybe a little idealistic and thinking about sort of the time and the expertise that we're talking about, I think there is a balance of capturing them in the report to show that these things are being investigated or like have been assigned an owner and like are signed up for like a check-in or a report out or some sort of accountability, right? That like they aren't just going to go on a list. Because I know even in digging, whether it was Christina or I found a report from like 2007, 2004, like I guess I just don't want this hefty list to kind of disappear, right? Like it feels really great to be talking about these ideas. And I definitely got that impression from the retreat and other conversations I've had, that to really combat that conception that we're just going to throw up our hands and say, oh, we need an override and it's going to be this many millions of dollars, right? Like that. I really think that that's a conception that people have. And so really leaning on lists like this and ideas like this is one way to combat that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So things are sort of coalescing in my mind, but first, Shanna.
I agree with Valerie for sure. I feel I think there's the right balance between we've done all this work and we really want to make sure too that we see it through to the end in due diligence. But clearly what Kristen has on that page is more than we can tackle, right? And so I think we had touched upon in earlier meetings, maybe trying to identify a subset. Are there 3 to 5 things on that list, or 2 or 3, whatever that we think potentially could have the most impact, and maybe requesting or whatnot to to the boards about the ability to continue to pursue just that kind of subset. And that would involve, the respective town departments, that would need to get pulled in for that, and then kind of send the rest of it, off to be disseminated.
Yeah, so I'm liking this idea that I think we're coming together with here. So on the new revenue opportunity side that Shannon and I were working on, it's sort of an easier problem than efficiencies, but we basically tried to give an exhaustive list, and then many of them, like for instance, looking at the commercial residential split tax rate, they're just explaining that there isn't an opportunity. I think at the end, we'll probably just say, here are 8 that look the most promising, some combination of being able to do them on a tight schedule and impact size and proof of success in other communities that have tried. These are the 8 that we would recommend following up on. And we could do the same thing on the efficiency side. We could say, here's sort of the exhaustive list of everything we heard, but from what we can see, here's the 10 that we think are likely to produce the most fruit. And what we could offer to the various boards is we could say, one thing we can offer up on both of these really is, some sort of review, some sort of accountability review on these items that we've highlighted. So for instance, we could come back before you in 3 months, and at that point, the work may be done in the schools department or in the town, but we'll come back to you and say, of these 10 things we've identified, we've seen great progress on these. Here's what we've seen. Here's the great work that's going on here in the town to get us there. And I think it would help us a lot as we move through the process to have a list we can point to that says, these are the good ideas we are developing, and here's what they are, and here's what the impact is. So I guess, does that make sense? Is it something to aim for, really, with both the new revenue and the efficiency? Sort of, here's at least a couple sentences on everything we heard or looked at, and then here's the 6 or 9 or 12 that we, from our take, look like the best return on effort. Okay.
I think that I stepped out on the meeting a little bit late, and I know you're going through the feedback you received from the retreat. If anybody has any feedback on efficiencies that they want to feed to me, I can add to this this document and kind of flush that out as well. So that would be super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I think moving forward, we have sort of the document prep completion, and then we have, well, I guess, is there remaining work to be done on the efficiencies, or do we feel like we've sort of heard what we're going to hear, and it's really document prep here? It's not further research, at least for now. I guess Christina or Kristen, should we hold that action item set as its own thing, or do we feel like we've kind of done the past we're going to do, and so at this point we're digesting it?
So I'll just speak for myself. I feel like I've done all I can. So I'm not sure if it's a matter of, this group, the list that Kristen just went through, I think pretty much captures everything. So, does this group agree with everything on that list? Is there anything that we should immediately take out? Like I'm sort of weighing the ambulance in-house discussion, but we may want to put that in there because I know a lot of people are going to ask the question. So I think I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think it's fair game for things to stay in as explainers to anticipate likely questions, even if we say we're not going to pursue this because of this, this, and this, but we did think of it, and here's the thought. Vibhu?
Tom, just want to understand, when I was looking into Christine shared efficiencies, some of those like fuel, etc., is there overall any cost efficiency program which town is running, iKaizen or any other program, which can look into these small pieces? It might not generate millions of dollars, but it can still be efficient. Is that something we want to talk about?
Kristen, I'm at least not aware that there's a standing efficiency process study that we're doing, like Kaizen, like Vibhu was talking about, where sometimes in purchasing departments they'll have this very systematic way that they're going through each item, and they're on some schedule rebidding, and there's a whole kind of apparatus around cost efficiency. I think we're using the best practice state bidding.
State bidding,
process.
right? But that doesn't always, go into effect on everything. So I think it's something we can definitely do better at. And it's something we can suggest in this report, that there be a system in place when a change or a new project comes on board with an associated cost, that we go through the vetting in a proper way, whatever that might be.
And if we centralize procurement, that may make it easier to implement a process like that. Valerie?
Yeah, just without Dr. Chu here, I didn't want anyone listening to think that this list was only on the town side, right? And I think it was a couple meetings ago, Dr. Chu went through a list of, well, I think it was more sort of impacts, but I just want to loop that into maybe the next meeting when he's here or something, to have some sort of corresponding effort happening on the schools. That's all.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. What I think is going to happen, the other stray thought was, as we're putting together the document, I think any place that we have benchmark data that says Westford is meaningfully above the median, we're going to need a little bit of an explainer, because that, at least in my group, whenever there was anything that's higher, people were like, well, is that different services? Is it different accounting? Is it different? Is it, just lack of efficiency? And I think it's just going to beg the question. So just something for us to keep in mind. We may, when we're doing a pass through the document, if there is something that we're off on, it's going to need an explainer. Okay, so what I think is going to happen is, probably if we have two co-editors, the first thing will be a pass through the draft document as it currently exists to identify content gaps, and then requests going out to people. There's a heading here. Do we intend to fill that in? And we may spend, I don't know, a week or so making sure that all the content that we want to be included is on hand. And then I would think from there would move into sort of a more detailed editing phase. I don't know if anyone here feels drawn to helping take leadership on document completion, either because it's a passion of yours, or you're particularly good at it, or is there anybody that feels like, yeah, that's my jam?
So I don't mind helping with the editing once we get a little bit more contact. I have to travel for work next week, so I'm probably not the best to volunteer, because I'm not going to be able to step in on anything until at least the middle to end of next week, and probably not a lot of time this weekend. But if somebody is taking an initial pass, I'm happy to be a kind of a secondary, and then after the middle of next week, I'll have more time to. I just don't want to agree to be a primary person and then disappear off the face of the earth for 5 or 6 days while I'm traveling. And I'll miss next week's meeting too. I'm going to be on a plane.
Yeah, I'm going to be in China next week, so I'll be out as well.
I'm happy to. I don't want to be a lead necessarily. Next week's a little hairy for me too, but I just want to make sure that we discuss the audience of this report specifically, so that the writing can be appropriate. I think I can be helpful in that regard, but I just want to make sure that, this is for general public consumption, right? So that's the idea, that's the goal.
Yeah, there's sort of two ways to view the audience. Sort of the strictest view would be for the boards that commissioned us. But I think it's best if you look at that and you look at sort of straight public communication on something like in a mailer, or like what we did last week. I think if there's a way to kind of find the middle, I'd like it. I'd hope it could be accessible to someone who wasn't particularly familiar with town budgeting process or school budgeting process. But I don't think it has to go all the way to like, this wouldn't be the document that would be used for ongoing public communication necessarily, if that makes sense. If there was a decision to do that more of this, it might be further streamlined or fuller, edited down even further.
I guess what would a reader be expected to know before they picked it up, just to make sure that I know that's really getting down to detail, but I think that's going to be important in editing. So mostly would be for the boards is essentially who this is for. So you wouldn't have to include as much information essentially in theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's not an easy question. I mean, it's a great question because it's not easy to answer. I mean, I would hope that somebody who showed up, for instance, at the town retreat, if they were curious, they could, you know, make it through the document, and there would be enough links and enough, you know, extra support that if there was something they didn't understand, there was a place they could go.
I was gonna say, I wrote, like, I've written probably almost 30 pages so far. And so I wrote it from the context of my knowledge base as the kind of like a somewhat informed, like kind of pays attention average Joe, but not necessarily someone that's super ingrained. So there would definitely be an inconsistency if we did it significantly more high level. We would have to make sure we tweaked a lot of what I wrote, you know, to kind of match. But I kind of made it like, I know something, but not a lot. And here's an explanation that would help like kind of bridge the gap in like a short form. If that helps. Sorry, Val, I know your hand was raised. I was just like, I wrote so many pages already.
I was just going to add that I think, in my mind at least, I think the report should at least be somewhere, like if we got to a point where we are doing like little explainer videos or breaking things down into other like social media chunks or stuff like that, similar to the handout from the retreat or not, that we would be able to like point back like, oh, you want to know more about this? Like, so I think of the report as not one-stop shop because it's obviously not going to have a history of Prop 2.5 going back 25 years, but you know, just to be able to sort of answer some of those secondary questions that someone might have with that like first level that first pass of communication flow after that, if that made any sense. And I hesitate, but I'm happy to take the lead on the report.
And I'm happy to
How
help.
about, why don't we split it up 3 ways with Valerie and Amy and me, and then we'll maybe next week we can lean a little bit on Shanna too. I think the first task is just to walk through it as it exists and identify the content gaps. So maybe if 3 of us could each take a path through the document and kind of combine notes and then send out assignments. If it was possible to do that this week, I think that would help kind of stay on timeline. And to the extent I have any assignments, which I may, on the plane is a good time to do it. So could that work, Valerie and Amy? Would you have time between now and Friday just to go through the draft as it is and identify where there's a heading with no material, or it looks like there's some missing content, and then maybe at the end of the week we can send out that assignment?
In the revenue pages, where there's missing content, there's corresponding highlights. I've been trying to really keep track of so that I don't miss going back to something. So in our half of the document, there should be some pretty key indicators, and I have a list too that I can send you.
And Amy, Tom, if you beat me in there, there's nothing written from school benchmarking yet. So that's a big chunk that I owe.
And I have a chunk of time scheduled tomorrow to work on the efficiencies. I didn't want to plug anything until we had this conversation. So I will be working on that tomorrow.
Okay. Great. So I think that's a good plan for now. We'll try to at least track down what's missing and make sure whatever's missing, people know there's an owner to it. If there's some background explainer stuff that's needed, that's not in the document yet, Dan, I don't know if you'd feel comfortable if we ask for your help. So for instance, like
anything you want at me, that's fine. I have a lot to write still too, so I gotta get going on that. But yes, anything you have questions on, feel free to send me.
Okay. And I think for any kind of background or, you know, if there is a great resource that we can link to that explains it particularly well, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We could put a short description with a link. Because, yeah, there's no need for us to boil the ocean here and recreate everything if there's a good resource out there. Okay, so I think what we've consolidated on is that basically our research and investigation period is largely wrapped up, and now we're in turning that into content for the report and editing down, and that makes sense. I think we've got enough time to do that well. So it feels to me like we're on track, on target here. Since we're going to be, I guess, Valerie, for you, do you think we should go ahead and have the meeting next week? Probably, right? We could even have it be a short meeting if that's what it is. And there'll just be a few of us missing.
Yeah, I mean, if we have quorum, I think lower the expectation that it probably wouldn't be 90 minutes if we're just checking in, or I don't know. I mean, like, if we feel like the efficiencies topic, that was an outstanding one, and maybe next week would just be more focused on the report and not meeting. What else would we be really fleshing out discussion way?
I think it'd only be if something came up in the course of investigating, drilling
Yeah.
down to the document. But Christina?
The only thing I could think of, Valerie, you had mentioned, waiting for Dr. Chu to do kind of the efficiencies on the school side. So I don't know if that would be something for next week or not.
Well, I guess I just wanted anyone that was watching this meeting separately to know that something else was happening on the school side. I don't know that, like, he already shared that. Well, he shared like the impacts. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say we could go and put it on the books, and you could cancel if early next week you feel like we're
Okay.
just in the.
Let's do that. Yeah. I was going to share actually that Sunday, the idea, I was reflecting on my retreat notes, and the idea of sort of communication strategy out of here. And Tom and I, you and I briefly talked about this, but the League of Women Voters, if anyone's familiar with that group in town, they have a monthly civic social, and they sort of, sometimes they pick like a topic or presenter. Sometimes it's just like sort of informal social hour to chat about town stuff. And I had been thinking about people who I saw at the retreat who were facilitating on the Micmac side of the tent. And I noticed a couple League of Women Voters members, and I was like, oh, so they didn't hear our spiel, just like we didn't hear the Micmac stuff, right? So I was like thinking in my head that when's the next civic social? Anyway, it's next Wednesday. I offered to attend, bring some printouts of the handout and sort of do the same sort of script. It's next Wednesday at 7:30. I'm happy to run that on my own, but just wanted to mention it here in case anyone else was available or interested. It is in person. It's at the WestfordCAT studio. It is open to all. It went in their newsletter on Monday. But again, happy to run with it. Just wanted to also put it out here. Another thought I've been running with is looping in our students. So the high school newspaper, WA Ghostwriter, I reached out to them to see if they'd be interested in like hearing sort of again, like the retreat spiel and breaking it down into what feels relevant for students and staff, and having an article or a series on that. So that's probably going to happen next week. And that's all I had in my head.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. If there was someone that could team up with Valerie for the League of Women Voters thing, that would definitely more fun if there were two people.
I might be able to join.
Okay, that'd be great. That'd be great.
I guess I just wanted to add that, and I know we might get into this at some point or whenever, about where that line is between like our work and what this task force's sort of communication strategy would be versus when do we hand off to the boards and sort of say or other groups after that. And in sort of reflecting on the retreat, I was thinking about how it felt like the sweet spot, right? Because there aren't these potentially controversial recommendations yet, or there aren't these like policy decisions facing this task force. So it's just kind of like, here's the data, let's talk about it. What's your reactions? What's your questions? And here's our analysis. And, oh, you've got a great idea. We'll see if we can incorporate that into the final report or not. And so that's where some of these ideas really came from, is really kind of pushing it out in this stage before the final report, but open to discussing that.
Yeah, Shannon?
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing. I mean, where is that line there? And maybe part of it is a question we want to propose to the boards when we meet with them, like, how do you need us to help disseminate this information further? Like, do we want to have some road shows? Do we want to go to the senior center? Do we want to show up at, maybe there's a, teachers union meeting that we could address, different populations, because clearly we're not able to target enough people in the settings that we've addressed so far, right? There's only been 200 to the strategic retreat. There was only a few people that came to our public forum. What is our responsibility to disseminate the information? And do we have some, even if it's not our responsibility, is it helpful to the town as a whole if we continue that messaging even after our report is done? And maybe that's a question for us, maybe that's a question to pose to the committees. How can we help get this information out between October and March town meeting, when there may be some items that come up to, vote that are a result of the budget itself, but also anything else that might result from this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's a great idea to offer it up to the boards. I think this group actually has a better chance of establishing sort of trust and authenticity in some ways than the elected boards do. And so, like, for instance, we could do sort of a short form and then a longer form explainer video at WestfordCAT. And that creates the opportunity to cut up little pieces of content and send it out by email with links, which I think can be pretty effective. If you're more likely to get someone to click on a 2-minute link that highlights an aspect of the problem, I think, than ask them to come to an evening seminar, which is harder to schedule for everybody. So why don't we agree that we'll offer that up to the boards as something that I think would recommend, but we probably want to get their buy-in before we ask anybody to put in the effort. If you haven't done one of these before, it's typically what happens is you take a slide deck, usually something you've already prepared and presented. So maybe the slide deck that we would use to brief the 3 boards when we get ready to do that. And it's better if there's 2 people, sometimes 3, and you basically go in and get mic'd, and you do first a voiceover, and then you do something on camera, and then they're good at doing that. So it takes, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, and then they go through a series of edits where you go and sit with them and they say, hey, this is how we've cut it. And we're like, okay, that didn't come out right, or we need to change this. And so it's a little bit of work, but then you've got something you can use in lots and lots of ways. So I think it'd be a great idea for us to do that. Okay, so I think we've covered next meeting. I think we know what our action plan is. I think at least clarified for me sort of what the remaining action items are. So that's all very helpful. Anything else? I think we agreed to have the meeting penciled in for next week, but Valerie will make the call early in the week if we feel like there's plenty of work to do and people are at it. She may call an audible and cancel the meeting. Amy?
I don't think I'll be able to be at the meeting next week.
Okay. Christina?
Just throwing this out there, we initially had talked about a meeting with all the boards around October 10th. I believe that's what you had said, Tom. And I'm just thinking that's 6 days before special town meeting. Just not sure how receptive people are going to be to that. Like, how much of their brain capacity is going to be just working on special town meeting. So not that I want to push this off too much, but what do we think about pushing off our joint board meeting to like the week after special town meeting, which I think the 24th is the select board, is the next select board meeting. But I guess we wanted it, or somewhere in that week, they wanted a separate meeting.
Yeah, let me ask Kristen. So that's a great thought, Christina. Kristen, do you feel better about I guess not having something that might be very presentation and sort of might require a lot of attention right before special town meeting?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the warrant, besides capital and the zoning, is pretty cut and dry, in my opinion. Dan can overwrite me if I'm having my expectations are a little bit off. So I see it both ways. If we do the presentation before town meeting, do we get more of an audience because people are actually paying attention going into town meeting? Or do we do it after when there's more bandwidth and capacity? To me, I think either way is okay, but Dan, do you have a preference based upon past practices of kind of staff and town capacity going up to a town meeting?
It usually gets hectic right before town meeting, so I would prefer the week after, actually. And that way we're focused on special town meeting and not trying to juggle too much at once.
Or potentially later that week. I mean, special town meeting is a Monday, so maybe later in that week.
Shannon, why don't you go ahead?
Is there any thought that there could be an ask of us to be at special town meeting to talk about anything? That would be my only question, because I feel like maybe that came up at the very beginning of our task force, that maybe they might call on us to present or to whatever. So I don't know if that's.
I think the warrant is set, and at this point, at this point, I don't think we'll be addressing it in special town meeting, but the advantage of going earlier is that, and I think this was reinforced, Kristen, by the conversation you had with, was it Shrewsbury? I'm trying to remember who you met with that talked about their approach to this kind of budget problem. The select board is going to have to, and the other boards too, the school committee, are going to have to come up with some direction on how to approach the budgeting season for this fiscal year 25 budget. And they're going to have to do it soon enough that that basically both town and schools understands the assignment early. And so, even a couple of weeks might matter a little bit. I guess I'm thinking if we could go on the earlier side, we just have a lot less time than we think we have. And so the select board is going to have to absorb this information and then basically give direction on what the budget process should look like from here. And the budget process is already underway. So I guess, is it fair to say, Kristen and Dan, that if it's not immediately before, we at least have 3 or 4 days of clear buffer before the meeting, before special town meeting, where you're not worried about this? Well, I guess I'll defer to you, because it's town staff that be most affected by this. So I have a slight preference to trying to go earlier because we just gives us more time. But
I'm just looking at the calendar. So select board meets the 10th, the League of Women Voters meets the 12th, special town meeting is the 16th. The week before, I'm out of town at a conference. And I think that the staff is probably most hectic, actually, like the 2 weeks before, getting postcards out and mailers out, making sure the website's up to date, the final public hearings occurring. Perhaps the budget task force could do a brief update to the select board on the 26th, like a very brief of this is where we're at and this is what you can expect. Our deadline was October 1st, and we're going to come back to you with a very, very comprehensive presentation. Let's just throw out October 19th, which is a Thursday. I hate to juggle all these dates, but that's kind of the reality right now I'm seeing.
yeah, the only thing I can think of is, so I think either it would be something like the 19th, or it might be the day before or after the existing select board meeting, meaning the select board would meet 2 nights in a row. So why don't we explore those? It'll be somewhere in that range. If it ends up being at the late end of the range, we'll make it work. I think it'd be hard to make it earlier than the day before or after the 10th meeting, because we're going to need time to complete the document. And if we want them to have it for a week, if the document's complete and we can distribute it by the 1st or 2nd of October, that's about as soon as I think we realistically can do it. So I think that's the range. Okay, so we don't need to decide now. We can float those dates and pick whatever works best.
I think if Val and Christina can float those some dates with the finance committee to see if there's anything others are aware of, and I'm happy to work with you, Tom, on dates with the select board, just so those 3 boards and committees can at least come together and we're not totally off base.
Yeah, so just to
Yeah.
be clear then, school committee is probably meeting on the 9th already.
We're meeting on the 10th because of the holiday, but I feel like
Okay.
after hearing all this, I hate to give like kind of 2 evenings to all of our boards, but it feels like later that same week of special town meeting would make more sense as opposed to waiting for the 23rd to the 27th and just trying to get it like the 18th or the 19th.
I would agree with that as long as we can all get quorum. I don't know how you feel, Tom.
I think it's a good idea. So we're
It'd be
basically
like
going to
the
ask all 3 of the boards to explore the 18th and the 19th.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a nice confined problem.
Yeah.
So if
You guys do 7:30 or 7?
I mean, I like 7 a little bit better. We can't go earlier than 7 because some folks are commuting home from the city, but
Right.
7 seems to work.
Okay.
7, yeah.
And would we be hybrid? Would we want one of the larger like school auditoriums or Millennium or sorry, we don't need to take everybody's time. Sorry.
I think it's better if we're all physically there to the extent we can be. So booking a bigger room is a good idea, I think.
Okay.
The fire station is also a nice spot for that kind of stuff, although it's not wired up for hybrid, isn't it? Okay, so probably need to be Millennium. Okay, great. So we're gonna explore those dates, adding to our action item list. Anything else we want to touch on today? I know we're a little bit early, but I think we're done. Anything else we want to touch base on? Okay, so you can expect some sort of email end of week or over the weekend if there's any content that we identify going through the outline that it seems like we might need from you. So there'll be a little bit of hashing out who actually is responsible for what as we identify gaps, but I'm hoping we can enter next week with a pretty clear understanding of exactly what's missing and exactly who needs what. Okay, if folks are good, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? And Vibu, we can't see you, and Kristen. We had a majority vote to adjourn, so we don't need your vote, I guess. But so thank you. Oh, and Kristen, you're right there. I was looking at 2 instances of you. Okay, thanks everybody. We're all set for now. And
Can
thanks
we
again for all the work you do.